I am Samantha. I have lived with my father since I was young. My mother passed away from illness when I was 5 years old. She was always kind, reading me picture books and hugging me tightly before sleep. However, that warmth was suddenly taken from me. After my mother's absence, our home felt too cold and quiet. For the first few years, my father was submerged in grief. Yet, he tried to recover by immersing himself in his work. After some time, he started dating occasionally, but never introduced any women to me, likely out of consideration for my feelings. Despite this, we lived peacefully together. On weekends, we watched movies or had picnics in the park. Even though he was busy, my father always made sure to bake a cake for my birthday and attended my school events whenever possible. However, around the time I turned 14 years old, my father was promoted and his job became even busier. He started traveling more, only being home about 5 days a month. I spent a lot of time alone, but I kept telling myself that Dad is working hard. Even though I felt lonely, I believed our relationship was still one of mutual support, but I was mistaken. One day he suddenly announced we're going to have a new family. Samantha, this is Elizabeth. She's going to be my wife. The woman he introduced wore sophisticated clothes and had a refined smile. Her blonde hair was neatly styled to her shoulders, and she extended her hand gracefully. Nice to meet you, Samantha. I'm happy to become your new mother. At that moment, a chill ran down my spine. Her smile was too perfect, almost artificial. Furthermore, Elizabeth had 2 children, 18-year-old Anthony and 16-year-old Christina. Though they were close to my age, they seemed like complete strangers to me. Let's get along as a family, Elizabeth said, but a sense of unease spread within me. As soon as Elizabeth and her children moved in, the atmosphere changed. Initially, Elizabeth acted kindly, smiling and saying, "Let's get along, Samantha." However, when my father left for his first business trip, her attitude shifted. "Samantha, you're part of the family, so you'll help around the house, right?" Feeling a sense of discomfort with those words, I nodded and said, "Yes." Helping out with chores was fine, but soon it was clear that helping meant doing everything. I made breakfast, washed dishes, cleaned, and did laundry. Elizabeth drank coffee in the living room elegantly. Christina was busy with her smartphone, and Anthony was immersed in his games. One day I asked, "Hey, Christina, aren't you going to help too?" At that, Christina laughed dismissively. "What? Why should I? You do it. I'm busy with a photo shoot for my social media." Anthony snorted. "That's a woman's job." Elizabeth just sipped her coffee looking pleased. When my father returned from his trip, Elizabeth began her performance. "Welcome back, Douglas. I've been taking care of everything at home. It's tough, but I can manage the family." I was dumbfounded. I had done everything, yet Elizabeth acted as if she was the one struggling. My father thanked her. "Thank you, Elizabeth," and turned to me with a smile. "Is Samantha helping a bit?" "Yes." I swallowed my words. Arguing seemed pointless without evidence, and my father might not believe me. Thus began my days of hell. Elizabeth's dominance escalated daily, but I couldn't ask for help from anyone. If I talked back, I was scolded for being impudent, and the punishments grew harsher. After school, I was immediately put to work. I had no time to play with friends or even study. I had to endure. Elizabeth's demands became more severe, and my burden exceeded its limits. Something had to be done. I made a decision and reported to Child Protective Services. When an investigator came and questioned Elizabeth, she cried profusely. "That's not true. I love Samantha like my own daughter. I'm doing everything for her, but she's misunderstanding." Her theatrical voice sent shivers down my spine. However, the investigator couldn't make any conclusion immediately. Days later, the results were communicated. There are issues within the home, but it cannot be labeled as abuse definitively, so only guidance will be provided. I was shocked. Despite all I had endured, nothing would change? Elizabeth sneered. "To do such a thing, what a terrible child." And since then, her treatment of me worsened. I became isolated in this house and lost any escape, but I swore to myself, one day, I will definitely turn this situation around. Until that day came, all I could do was endure. My 18th birthday should have been a special day, but reality was different. My father was away on a business trip. Of course, I had received a message from him in advance, apologizing for not being able to be home on my birthday. However, the words that followed chilled my heart. "Enjoy a wonderful dinner with Elizabeth and the others." Dinner? For a moment, I didn't understand what was being referred to. Then the meaning quickly became clear. Elizabeth had lied to my father claiming, "We are celebrating Samantha's birthday at a famous restaurant in grand style." Of course, there had been no such plans. Like any other day, I came home from school and started preparing dinner. Christina was in the bathroom, as usual, filming videos for her social media. She had many followers and claimed, "I'm going to be an influencer in the future." Anthony, despite having graduated from college, did not work and spent all his time gaming in his room. Elizabeth was drinking wine in the living room. Gathering my courage, I said, "Hey, it's my birthday today." Elizabeth replied with a cool expression. "Oh, that's right, but you're an adult now, so there's no need for special treatment, right?" Christina giggled and added, "Exactly, you're 18 years old now. Why not celebrate by yourself?" I felt anger but held it in and continued making dinner quietly. As we finished eating, the doorbell rang. A package had arrived. It was from my father. When I opened it, there was a beautifully wrapped box and a letter inside. "To Samantha, happy 18th birthday. I am proud of how you always work hard with love, Dad." As I read the letter, tears nearly spilled from my eyes. However, Elizabeth's cold voice came from behind. "What's that? Let me see." She snatched the letter from my hands, glanced at it, and scoffed. "Ah, Douglas does love this kind of thing. Proud of how hard you work. What exactly is she working hard at?" "Elizabeth, give it back." When I reached out, Elizabeth deliberately threw the letter onto the sofa. Well, you should be grateful, but things are going to change now. What do you mean? I watched her warily. Elizabeth took a sip of her wine and smirked. You're 18 years old now, right? That means you're an adult. So what? As an adult, it's normal to pay your own rent, isn't it? I couldn't believe my ears. Pay my own rent? That's right. From now on, you'll be paying $1,000 a month. Christina and Anthony chuckled. Well, it makes sense. You can't expect to live here for free forever. But it's only $1,000, so you should be grateful, Anthony added. I was beyond angry. What about Christina and Anthony? What about them? Do they pay rent too? Elizabeth shrugged dismissively. Don't be silly, Samantha. They're family, so they don't need to. Aren't I family too? Elizabeth smirked. You're not my real daughter. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I silently returned to my room and opened a drawer in my desk. Inside was an important property deed. It clearly stated that the house was in my name. My mother had left it for me. The owner of the house was neither Elizabeth, nor even my father, but me. The next morning, I consulted a lawyer. Then he calmly said, the house is in your name. That means you have the right to charge for rent from anyone living here. That's right. Conversely, Elizabeth and her children cannot live here without your permission. If they don't pay rent, they can be treated as squatters. I see. I smiled slowly. That night, in the living room with Elizabeth and the others, I quietly said, I don't think I should be the one paying rent. You should be, I suggested. What? Elizabeth looked shocked. This house is in my name. If you want to keep living here, you should be the ones paying rent, I explained. Samantha, you're kidding, right? Christina exclaimed in panic. Anthony tried to say something, but was at a loss for words. If you don't pay, you'll need to leave, I stated firmly. You're joking? Elizabeth screamed, but I was done holding back. Elizabeth, you said it yourself, didn't you? It's normal for adults to pay rent, I reminded her. Elizabeth's face turned red with anger as she yelled. Douglas would never allow this. I responded calmly. Then why don't you call Dad and check with him? Elizabeth was left speechless. Silence took over the living room. My counterattack had finally begun. The next morning, I received a call from my father. Samantha, can you talk right now? Yes, Dad. What's going on? Elizabeth called me. She said you told them they had to pay rent. Is that true? I took a deep breath and answered quietly. Yes, it's true. My father sounded puzzled. I could hear a small sigh from the other end of the phone. Samantha, can't you reconsider? They are upset because it was so sudden. I closed my eyes quietly. Reconsider? Would someone who truly understood what I had been through say that? Dad, can I ask you something? What is it, Samantha? Do you know what kind of treatment I've been receiving from Elizabeth and her kids all this time? While you were away on business trips, I was always the one stuck with the household chores. Elizabeth didn't do anything, but when you came back, she'd act like she'd done everything. Is that true? That's not all. Even when I reported to Child Protective Services, it ended with just a warning because there wasn't enough evidence. You didn't know, but I've been fighting this alone. Samantha, that's and yet, the moment I turned 18 years old, she said, you're an adult now, so you should pay rent. Anthony and Christina are family, but you're not my real daughter. My father was silent for a while. I knew that it was necessary for him to face the realities he had failed to see. Eventually he said slowly, I'm sorry, Samantha. I didn't know anything, and you didn't try to know. My father had nothing to say in return. I can't forgive Elizabeth and her kids, so they need to leave, I stated firmly. Understood, Samantha. His voice was a bit shaky. When the call ended, I stared at the ceiling, holding my phone tightly. But it wasn't over yet. I wouldn't let my guard down until Elizabeth and her kids were out of this house. That night, I faced Elizabeth and her children in the living room. Everybody, I've made a decision. Elizabeth crossed her arms and glared at me coldly. Christina sat with a sullen look, crossing her legs, while Anthony was busy with his smartphone as usual. The house is in my name. If you want to stay, pay rent. But if you don't pay, you'll need to leave. Elizabeth scoffed. Samantha, you're joking, right? You're still a child and you say that. I'm an adult, right? Didn't you say that yourself? Elizabeth's expression stiffened. I've decided. You have 30 days to leave. Christina stood up abruptly, kicking the chair. What? Who do you think you are? This is Dad's house. No, it's my house. That's a lie. Elizabeth raised her voice, but I had already prepared the documents and placed them on the table. Here the property deed. Feel free to check it. Elizabeth's complexion changed instantly. What? I can no longer forgive how you've treated me like a maid. So you need to leave this house. Elizabeth said with a trembling voice. Don't mess with me. A child like you doesn't have the right to decide something like this. The law seems to think otherwise. As I recalled the advice from my lawyer, I calmly informed them. If you don't vacate within 30 days, I can sue you for illegal occupancy. Anthony, still clutching his smartphone, muttered, seriously. Christina looked incredulous. I'll tell Dad. Elizabeth shouted. I already spoke to him. I replied calmly. What did he say? He said he understood, I said. Elizabeth's face turned pale. No, this can't be. Christina stood up yelling. This is ridiculous, kicked out by a kid like this. It's not ridiculous. I've made this decision, I stated. I stood up, gathered the documents, and added just one more thing. Pack your things within 30 days. I then left the living room. Behind me, I could hear Elizabeth's shouts and Christina's cries, but it didn't matter anymore. This is my house. Days passed since I notified Elizabeth and her children about the eviction. They were clearly panicking, but seemed to have no real intention of leaving. Christina and Anthony remained defiant, and Elizabeth was obviously scheming to corner me somehow. Then, finally, my father returned from his business trip. The moment I heard the front door open, I headed to the living room. "Douglas!" Elizabeth cried out, throwing herself at him in a scene that seemed straight out of a movie. "Honey, you have to understand. Samantha suddenly started saying crazy things, trying to kick us out. Where are we supposed to go? She's confused. Please, say something to her." Elizabeth's performance was perfect. Crying desperately, she played the part of the unjustly ousted, pitiful stepmother. However, I wasn't going to be deceived. Neither was my father anymore. He gently peeled Elizabeth off him and said with a cold look, "Elizabeth, stop the act." "What, honey?" Elizabeth froze. "I contacted Child Protective Services," he continued. At those words, Elizabeth froze. "The CPS?" she repeated in a trembling voice. "I had them verify what kind of treatment you were giving Samantha while I was away. How you've been treating her." His voice was stern. "Honey, what are you talking about? I would never do such things. Don't lie, Elizabeth." His low voice cut her off. "The CPS has records of past abuse reports from Samantha. There was no formal punishment due to insufficient evidence, but it was clear there were problems in the household." I quietly listened to their conversation, surprised yet relieved that my father hadn't just taken my word for it. He had actually checked the facts himself. But Elizabeth broke down, her voice teary. "It's a misunderstanding. Samantha was just rebelling against me, exaggerating everything. I truly considered her family. So let me ask," he said sternly, looking down at Elizabeth. "How did you spend Samantha's 18th birthday?" Elizabeth stumbled over her words. "Well, that is. You told me it would be celebrated grandly at a restaurant, but in reality, Samantha was making dinner." Elizabeth just opened and closed her mouth, unable to respond. I was too caught up in my work to see what was happening. "But now I understand. What you've done is abuse." Elizabeth collapsed in tears. "Please, Douglas, we're family, aren't we? Believe me. You said you loved me." He sighed and said emotionlessly, "The person I loved wasn't lying to me." Elizabeth's face was drained of all colors. "That's enough. We're getting a divorce." Christina and Anthony watched as their mother broke down. "Why would you say that, Dad?" Christina screamed. "You're abandoning Mom? That's cruel. It's time for you two to face reality." He spoke quietly. "You have always looked down on Samantha and pushed all the household chores onto her. It was wrong of me to have allowed this to go on, but I've reached my limit." Anthony stood up abruptly, kicking his chair. "Don't mess with us. Where are we supposed to live now?" I responded calmly. "You'll have to figure that out on your own." Christina and Anthony glared at me, but their words no longer bothered me. Elizabeth was still trying to cling to Dad. "Please, please, this is wrong. Don't abandon me." "The one who kept deceiving me was you," he replied. With those words, he slowly left the room. Elizabeth collapsed in shock. I looked down at them and stated plainly, "Pack your things quickly and leave." Christina, her face turning red with anger, shouted, "Even if Dad abandons us, this is the only place we have." "Are you going to pay the rent?" I asked calmly. Christina was left speechless. "If you don't pay, it will be considered illegal occupancy." At this, Elizabeth fell completely silent. There was no longer any arrogance or grace in her eyes, only the look of a defeated dog filled with despair. This was the end. I muttered that to myself as I quietly left the living room. A few days later, Dad officially filed for divorce. He proceeded quickly with the proceedings through a lawyer against Elizabeth. She was left completely clueless as she watched the family she had built up crumble before her eyes, but more damning facts came to light. It was discovered that Elizabeth had been using Dad's credit card without his permission in the past. This was considered financial exploitation and even credit card fraud, and Dad's lawyer was preparing for litigation. Receiving this news, Elizabeth was at a loss for words and ultimately lost everything. The false world she had been upholding crumbled completely, and she left the house with a stunned expression. Anthony and Christina, having lost Elizabeth's support, were at a loss for where to go. Anthony continuously moved from one friend's house to another in a nomadic lifestyle, while Christina went through a cycle of living with her boyfriend, breaking up, and then swiftly finding a new boyfriend to ensure she had a place to live. They were forced to face reality beyond the false family they had built. With the liberation from Elizabeth's toxic influence, a sense of subtle relief began to wash over me. As those who were no longer needed departed, the house gradually returned to a state of peaceful tranquility. The noisy days seemed like a lie as the house was enveloped in a calm atmosphere. It became excruciatingly clear to me just how disruptive Elizabeth, Anthony, and Christina had been to the harmony of my world. At the same time, my father expressed his remorse repeatedly. Initially overwhelmed by an indescribable surge of anger, as time progressed, I found myself able to methodically work through my tangled emotions. "Samantha, I am truly sorry for everything. I was completely oblivious to the struggles you were enduring." He earnestly apologized. Regret and frustration were evident in his words. At that moment, I was uncertain about how to react. Deep down, I still harbored feelings of resentment that I found hard to forgive. However, considering he had been manipulated by Elizabeth too, I couldn't bring myself to blame him completely in my heart. I began to think that perhaps my father was just another victim too. Accepting this was not easy, but I decided to gradually try to reconcile. Initially, I was cold towards him, but gradually his sincere demeanor moved me. I may never completely forget, but at least I chose to mend our relationship without being bound by the past to move forward. Despite the difficulties, I managed to graduate from college. Each step held significant meaning for me. Initially consumed by problems at home, I had no room to think about my future. But after graduating and going through job hunting, I finally began to walk my own path. Then I made a resolution. I would remodel the house. I developed a desire to make that house a truly peaceful place this time. It was the house my mother left us where my father and I could start afresh with renewed spirits. Let's truly make this a place where our hearts can rest easy, I declared as I initiated plans for the renovation. During this period, Elizabeth and the others faced their own struggles. Following her defeat in court, Elizabeth found herself accumulating debt in an effort to manage repayments, leaving her no time to enjoy her previous luxuries like sipping elegantly on coffee or indulging in stylish attire, as she grappled with her new, harsh realities daily. Anthony was trying to find a job but was having trouble securing employment due to his past issues. He was desperately searching for job opportunities, but was not progressing well. Christina, who had been thriving as an influencer on social media, faced backlash over a casual remark that went viral. Furthermore, her past actions were exposed online, garnering resentment from followers. I realized that there was no longer a need for me to concern myself with their tribulations. With each step of the house's renovation, the anxiety and anger in my heart gradually faded. The act of renewing the house felt as though it was rejuvenating me as well, and I found myself increasingly eager to see the transformation. Finally, on the day everything was completed, warm light bathed the interior, casting a glow that filled the space with tranquility and a deep sense of security. Realizing that this house is my new starting point, I take a deep breath.